When the world's highest peak meets human error, even the smallest mistake can become a death sentence. Marty Hoey, the harness that wasn't. It was May 15th, 1982. A team of American climbers was inching up Mount Everest's icy slopes. Among them was Marty Hoey, one of the most experienced and respected mountaineers on the team. Marty wasn't new to high-stakes climbs. She'd summited Mount Rainier more than 100 times. She was careful, strong, and fully trusted by her teammates. This climb could have made her the first American woman to reach Everest's summit, and she was just days away from that historic moment. That morning, she and teammate Jim Wickwire were moving toward Camp 6. At more than 26,000 feet, the body starts to shut down, even if someone just sits still. It's a zone so dangerous it's called the death zone, and climbers in it must stay clipped into a fixed rope for safety. This rope connects to a harness, and if that harness isn't secure, there's no backup. As Marty and Jim carried heavy gear up a steep 45-degree slope of loose rock and snow, Marty leaned back slightly to let Jim pass. It was a small move, but in that instant, her harness buckle came undone. Suddenly, she was no longer attached to the rope. One slip, and that was it. She fell 6,000 feet, vanishing into a crevasse below. No one could stop it. Jim later recalled how fast it all happened. One moment she was there, and the next, she was gone. Her body was never recovered. The cause? A buckle. A single piece of equipment not properly fastened. At sea level, it might not matter much. But on Everest, it's the difference between life and death. Exhaustion clouds judgment. The air is thin. Even the best climbers miss details. That's why climbers double and triple check gear in the death zone. Marty's death wasn't due to recklessness, just a tragic moment of human error in an unforgiving place. David Sharp, alone and unreachable. Now fast forward to 2006. David Sharp, a 34-year-old British climber, was making his third attempt to conquer Everest. He wasn't inexperienced. He had already climbed Cho Oyu, the sixth highest mountain in the world. But this time, he chose to go solo, with minimal supplies, no guide, and without any backup oxygen beyond 2 small bottles. He didn't carry a satellite phone or even a radio. He also hired a low-service expedition company, meaning once he reached advanced base camp, he was completely on his own. Climbing Everest with so little margin for error is like playing a game of high-altitude Russian roulette, but David believed in doing it his way. On May 14th, he set out for the summit from a high camp on the northeast ridge. The climb was long and hard. He was still near the top late in the day, far beyond the safe turnaround time of 2 p.m. That alone is considered a major mistake on Everest. By nightfall, his oxygen was gone, and he took shelter under a rocky outcrop known as Green Boots Cave. The name isn't symbolic. It refers to the body of another climber, frozen in place, marking the spot. At 28,000 feet, David was now freezing, frostbitten, and nearly unconscious. He sat in the cave, arms wrapped around his knees, unable to move. And then, the unthinkable. Over 40 climbers passed him by. Some assumed he was dead. Others realized he was still alive, but didn't think he could be saved. One group led by Mark Inglis, a climber making history as the first double amputee to summit Everest, stopped briefly. They radioed for advice and were told to keep moving. It's chilling, but in the death zone, stopping too long could mean risking others' lives. Still, the hardest part wasn't that others walked past. It was that David had no way to call for help, no extra oxygen, and no partner to support him. His death became one of Everest's most talked about tragedies, sparking questions that still echo. Could he have been saved if he hadn't climbed solo? Should climbers be required to assist anyone they find alive? On Everest, there are no easy answers. Francis Arsenyev, Sleeping Beauty of Everest. Francis Arsenyev and her husband Sergei were passionate mountaineers. In 1998, they set out to achieve a bold goal. Francis would become the first American woman to summit Everest without supplemental oxygen. It's an elite and risky feat, but their decision to climb without Sherpas, guides, or a support team made the climb even more dangerous. After waiting out the weather at 8,300 meters, they made their summit attempt. They reached the top late on May 22nd. Base camp watched them through telescopes, cheering their success. But that victory quickly turned into a crisis. As they descended, Francis began to struggle. The extreme cold and lack of oxygen were taking a toll. Eventually, she collapsed. Sergei made the impossible choice to leave her and climb back up with oxygen and medicine. He never returned. A year later, his body was found, suggesting he died trying to save her. Francis was found the next morning by a team of climbers from Uzbekistan. She was alive, but barely, frostbitten, weak, and unable to move. They gave her oxygen and tried to help, but without the equipment to carry her, they had to move on. The next day, two more climbers, Ian Woodall and Kathy O'Dowd, reached her. She could barely speak, but begged them not to leave her. They stayed as long as they could, but eventually had to go. Francis died there at 40 years old. Her body lay for nearly a decade on the side of the trail, earning the name Sleeping Beauty. In 2007, Ian Woodall returned to move her body out of view, offering some dignity to her final resting place. Her story asks the kind of question no climber ever wants to face. What would you do if your partner was dying and you couldn't carry them? Her decision to climb without oxygen or support proved fatal, not just for her, but for Sergei too. The couple had trained together for years, pushing their limits on some of the world's toughest peaks. Francis had already made a name for herself as a determined climber, but this goal, Everest without oxygen, was the ultimate test. At high altitudes, even basic movement becomes a monumental task, and decision-making turns sluggish and risky. By the time they began their descent, both Francis and Sergei were depleted, their bodies pushed far beyond normal limits. Witnesses later described Francis sitting motionless, barely able to keep her eyes open, surrounded by the unforgiving whiteness of the death zone. Her final hours were marked by intense suffering, but also by the quiet bravery of two climbers who stayed by her side when few others would. The tragedy of Francis is not just in how she died, but in how close she came to surviving. Vitor Negrete, pushing the limits alone. Brazilian climber Vitor Negrete had already tasted Everest's summit in 2005 using oxygen. But in 2006, he returned with a new goal, to summit without any supplemental oxygen. Not only that, but he also climbed without a Sherpa, without a satellite phone, and with minimal backup. He did reach the top. It was a proud moment, not just for him, but for all of Brazil. But as is often the case on Everest, reaching the summit is only halfway. On the way down, Vitor's condition began to deteriorate rapidly. The lack of oxygen, exhaustion, and biting cold were too much. His Sherpa, Ang Dawa, had stayed at Camp 3, and when Vitor didn't return on time, he climbed up to find him. He eventually did, but by then, Vidar was near collapse. They tried to descend together, but Vidar died just before reaching safety. If he had taken oxygen, would he have had the strength to survive? If he had climbed with a full team, would someone have helped him down in time? These are haunting questions because his story isn't just about physical endurance. It's about the limits of human isolation in one of the harshest places on Earth. Vidar was known for his mental toughness and unmatched endurance, qualities that had earned him respect in the climbing world. But Everest is a mountain that doesn't care about past victories. It demands perfection every time. Without real-time updates or the ability to call for help, no one knew he was in distress until it was almost too late. By the time Ungdawa found him, Vidar was suffering from severe altitude sickness, barely able to speak or stand. Every step downward became a struggle against a body that was shutting down. They were agonizingly close to safety, just a few hundred meters from Camp 3, but the mountain claimed him anyway. His story stands as a sobering reminder that on Everest, independence can be both heroic and fatal. Hristo Prodanov, one glorious summit, one fatal descent. In April's 1984, Hristo Prodanov set out to do what no Bulgarian had ever done: summit Everest via the difficult West Ridge, without supplemental oxygen. It was a bold plan. This route is one of the most dangerous on the mountain, rarely attempted, especially solo. Hristo reached the summit at 6:15 p.m., far later than is considered safe. The descent in darkness and dropping temperatures would be incredibly dangerous. That alone was a massive risk. The next day, Hristo radioed his team. He had lost his gloves, a devastating problem in the sub-zero temperatures of the death zone. Soon after, his voice faded from the radio. No one heard from him again, and his body was never found. What made Hristo's climb so tragic was that he had done everything right on the way up. But climbing solo in April when weather is more volatile and descending after dark were a string of choices that together became deadly. His achievement was monumental. The first person ever to summit Everest via the West Ridge without oxygen, and the first Bulgarian to stand on the roof of the world. Back home, the news of his ascent was celebrated as a national triumph. But as the hours passed with no sign of his return, that celebration turned into growing fear. His final radio transmissions were faint and slurred, likely a sign of the oxygen deprivation and freezing temperatures taking hold. Some experts later speculated that without gloves, Hristo would have lost the ability to use his hands, making descent almost impossible. In the end, it wasn't just the climb that tested him. It was the descent that demanded everything, and Everest took it all. Mount Everest is not just the highest point on Earth, it's a place where every single decision matters. From forgotten harnesses to delayed summit pushes, solo climbs to inadequate oxygen plans, the margin for error is painfully small. These climbers, Marty Hoey, David Sharp, Francis Arsentiev, Vidar Negrete, and Hristo Prodanov, were skilled, experienced, and passionate. But their stories show that even the best can make mistakes when the stakes are sky high. Everest will always be there, tempting adventurers. But success isn't just measured by reaching the summit, it's by getting back down alive. The mountain doesn't forgive, and it doesn't forget. If these stories made you look at Everest differently, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more deep dive true stories from the world's most extreme places. Stay smart, stay safe, and remember, on Everest, Getting to the top is optional, but getting down is mandatory.